Today's consumers are scrutinizing ingredient labels more than ever. And two ingredients often under the spotlight are seed oils and natural flavors. So, should you include them in your formulation? If you already have them, do you need to reformulate? What do they signal to your target customer? And how can you build a product that balances taste, texture, shelf life, and transparency? There's a lot to do here. So, I invited on Robin Puskas from JPG Resources to really walk through the details on how to think about these considerations for your products. Robin, welcome onto the podcast.
Great. Jordan, thank you so much for having me.
So let's kind of break down what some of the trends are from a consumer standpoint, and then we can also get into a little bit of more of the science later. But what are you seeing or hearing from the consumer audiences and the brands and the companies that you're working with around these two topics?
Yeah, great question. So certainly, you're raising seed oils, and we are having a lot of conversation around that. Many of our founder teams, one of the first things that we do when we are looking at developing a product with the founder team is set up our guardrails. Like, what do we want in and what do we want out? And many people are now flagging seed oils as a thing that either they don't want or they have a sense that their consumers don't want. Um, it's an interesting sort of disconnect in some cases where the founder team sometimes accuse that they don't have an objection to it, but their consumers do. And so they're doing a little bit of listening to try to formulate against what they are hearing their target consumer is looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see a lot of this movement from content creators across TikTok, Instagram, and really the main thing being that highly processed, um, a lot of times they're like vegetable derived oils. They're saying have a chance of being highly inflammatory. And because of that, they're taking like anything that are kind of seed-based oils or even a lot of vegetable oils, and they're saying that, instead use things like, avocado oil for within products or sometimes like high oleic based oils. And I think it causes a lot of confusion because a lot of consumers don't quite know what the science is and what really backs it up. Or, I'm curious to hear from you. Is there a lot of research out there one way or the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a lot of research. Most research is funded one way or the other by the industry or by academia. So understanding where those studies tend to land, you can kind of follow the money a little bit. But I will say that for the objection to seed oils, it usually falls into one of three buckets, right? It's usually an objection to the processing that's perceived as being very harsh, or it is a, as you're saying, inflammation issue, which is sometimes flagged for omega-6s or uh, linoleic acid content. So in terms of the science on the inflammation, I think that there's not a huge amount that's much more anecdotal. Where I kind of come more in contact just from the supply chain work that we do is with the processing and understanding how some processing that's being flagged is different than others. So whether or not hexane extraction is really a problem is a separate ball of wax, I would say. But that is something that's being flagged by a lot of consumers, feeling like the harsh extraction is unpalatable. It's really focused on seed oils, and that's the perception of that's where that process is happening most. Certainly, that's true for most corn oil and most soybean oil. Conventional, organic's a little bit different story. But I would say that it's not quite accurate to lay it out like the seeds are our enemy. The process can be applied to any oils, and even there are some lower grade olive oils that would be categorized as a pomace oil that actually do have that hexane extraction applied to them. So it's really more process than the actual oil itself.
And you say hexane. What is that? I'm just curious.
So hexane extraction is a high heat and chemical extraction for getting oils out of it can be grains, it can be the sort of pulp and pits of a olive oil extraction. It's not dissimilar to some really old foodways, actually. The way that we use lye to break down corn to make masa and tortillas. It is a similar process happening at a larger scale, so it feels more unpalatable to a lot of people.
Interesting. I always like trying to break down the consumer sentiment behind a lot of these
Yes.
movements. And to me, what it actually feels like, kind of, I'm a millennial kind of growing up with McDonald's as a kid and all these fast foods in the heart of like the obesity movement. And now as a parent of young kids myself, right? Like we don't go to a lot of fast food restaurants. We're very kind of cautious of what we're giving kids. And it almost feels like a rejection or of that kind of childhood fast food mentality where everything was deep fried and a
Right.
rejection of that. And in terms of looking what Ford do, the healthier approach, it seems to be going towards those avocado olive oils that are processed correctly because of these negative feelings towards that childhood, epidemic and problems that we faced.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something that is really fundamental to the way that we think about food and our food systems, and that's the sort of emotional component. Like, do we believe in the person or the entity that's making our food, right? And so it's always been important for anyone who's making food in food service, or if you're doing a larger scale, like consumer goods uh, that your consumers believe in you and believe that you're operating in good faith.
Hmm.
I think trust is at an all-time low when it comes to consumer sentiment around food. Um, and even though I do think that a fair amount of social media content is intended to strike us in an emotional way so that it inspires fear and distrust, the other side of that coin is that uh, it's tremendously positive the amount of caring that is going into what are people eating, and especially, as you say, what are we feeding our kids? I also have a child, and it's a very good metric for me at work. Is this something that I would feed my child? And uh, if there's hesitation there, that's information.
There is. And I love that kind of sense of trust where we used to trust a little bit more, at least the larger population in call it big food, but
Yeah.
even just calling them big food sets them up as this David and Goliath type story where they're in operating their own self-interest. And if they're operating their own self-interest, it's inherently against, quote, us as consumers. And I think a lot of people see that dynamic. So all the activities they're doing some valid, some we just don't know about, feel like they're probably against the health and wellness of people just to extract as much, profit as possible.
Yeah, I do feel like that is very much the thinking, and the larger the scale, the deeper the distrust. When I first started getting started in product development, this was not my pathway professionally. My background is culinary. I went to French Culinary Institute and I learned how to make formulations at the Union Square Green Market in New York. I was working with farmers to extend the growing season. And so my formulations, so to speak, were like really, they were recipes for something
Yes.
that was going to last. But when I moved into larger scale manufacturing, I started working with a big manufacturer, big to me, in Brooklyn. They were making pasta sauce. They made their own brand. They made Rayo's, and I was really astonished coming into that space that the manufacturing equipment was like a giant kettle, and it was really almost kitchen equipment at a massive scale. And they have someone chopping onions and they have someone tearing basil like the leaves off of the stalk. And so I would say that for large scale food production, the same principles apply as they do in your own personal kitchen. It's like if the ingredients are good and the process is good, what you make is going to be wonderful. And if there are chinks anywhere in there, if you don't have the good ingredients, or if your process is somehow not right or cutting corners, that's going to affect the quality of what comes out.
I love that. So switching gears to the other side of this conversation, natural flavors is really interesting. When I was running my brand T squares, we had energy bars and we used some, quote, natural flavors that we got
Hmm.
from a large flavor house to enhance what we were doing. We used a blueberry flavor. And a citrus flavor. And at the time, I was like new to the industry, and that's what I was just kind of like told to do instead of using like real orange juice because it was variable and there it could go rancid and all these other food safety issues. And so there are these stabilized natural flavors. But I'd love for you to break down kind of what they really are because at the same point I remember realizing like they wouldn't tell me what was in the
Yeah.
flavors. And it was like one of the
Right.
few areas that's considered like a trade secret that they're allowed to hide and mask
Yes.
what's in there in
Right.
food, which is not applicable anywhere else. And so
Hmm.
kind of breakdown, we kind of know about like a lot of artificial versus natural flavors a little bit, but what are natural flavors and kind of why are they used?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I saw some of your posts around blueberry flavor also, which I really enjoyed reading. Blueberry is a tough one. It's one of the most common, blueberry and strawberry are the most common flavors where brands that are doing a clean label product will consider leaning into natural flavors. Exactly as you say, what's in a natural flavor? There is an element of black box, which I think is what a lot of people don't like about it. What could be in there is a long list of inputs, and what is actually in there is considered proprietary, which erodes trust. So I would say that there are a lot of levers, though, that founders can pull if they are looking to enhance the flavor of the inputs. And listen, using food, there's no substitute for using food to make our food taste good. But there are ways that, especially if it's something that has a shelf life of more than a couple of weeks, things start to change, and the way that you've made it in your kitchen is different from what the consumer gets on shelf, like weeks or months later. So, some of the levers that there are to pull on adding sort of a additional like layer of flavor on top of your food formulation. One is extracts, right? So, like a vanilla extract is very straightforward. It's usually some kind of alcohol and then the vanilla inputs. And that's the case for other extracts as well. So, there's a lot more transparency in using an extract versus a natural flavor.
Are the reason people are using natural flavors are typically cheaper? Are they more stable? Kind of why a natural flavor instead of an extract?
Great question. Well, extracts are not usually as powerfully flavored, right? And there's a lot less nuance. It's just going to taste how it tastes. They don't tend to be as stable. They don't last as long, and they're more expensive. So all of that adds up to like a little bit of a challenge in selecting an extract over a natural flavor. But the transparency trade-offs are real.
With our flavors at one point later in the life cycle, I realized like, let me try to reformulate our energy bars without the blueberry flavor and to use a natural or like a blueberry juice, essentially, like a blueberry concentrate. And
Hmm.
it was tough because based on what we were doing, there was like a higher water level
Right.
that was in there that would coat we used puffs, like puffed amaranth
Oh,
and
yeah,
things
and they
with
got
in there.
wet.
And they got wet, right? And so it like
Yeah.
changed the texture because it's supposed to be crunchy.
Mhm.
And and so it created this really weird dynamic. And we never actually got there before we ended up shutting down the company. But it
Yeah.
was really difficult to produce a flavor that way, which also led me to question like maybe we just shouldn't make a blueberry flavored product if we can't
Right.
use blueberry in it. Like why fake something if
Right.
we can't actually make it real? And so, maybe some flavors might not need to exist in every single food, and they should be closer to their natural form. I think it gets the issue that you talked about along with like transparency and as close that you can get to the kitchen way of doing something or the culinary way of making a food versus the lab way.
Yeah, I love that, and that's very much my direction as well. Where sometimes if you're just sort of fighting uphill against nature. The real answer is to make something else, like lean into the flavor of the food that you're making. And so, if it's possible to make a really fragrant and wonderful vanilla flavor product because the vanilla extract performs well, or other fruits that present longer and like more identifiably in the product, pick those. I think that that is a very good sort of way of understanding how to build food out of food. There are some middle grounds too with the natural flavor providers. So I have definitely worked with founder teams who go to the flavor house and say, because of the variety of reasons, I need to use a natural flavor in my product, but I'd like one that doesn't include these inputs. And so the founder teams themselves have their no-no list on what goes in. It's easier with an organic flavor. So if there are sort of production concerns that compel you to go down this road, there are ways of doing it that are sort of more sensitive and more intentional.
I almost wonder, I get the proprietary nature of a lot of these flavors, but I wonder if there's an opportunity for some of these flavor houses to do closer to extract formulations that you can
Yeah.
disclose the ingredients simply. And I think there would be a huge demand, especially amongst natural products and maybe even some of the large companies as regulations starting to change, to have those simpler ingredient decks to maximize those. So, I'm excited to see where things go. And as you're just kind of mentioning, for companies who have products in market or maybe are just launching them, how much do you think, like what considerations do you need to think about in order to make a decision on if they need to change their recipe and their formulation or not, based on having seed replacing non-seed oil or seed oils with non-seed oils or replacing natural flavors with extracts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that best case scenario is you go in with a formulation at the start that you want to carry through. Obviously, that is the least expensive and the most sort of continuous way to grow. It's not that common that founder teams have a formulation when they release their product and then just keep making it that way indefinitely. So teams that are bumping into, I think I need to change my formulation, sometimes feel like, oh, I failed, or there's something about my planning that wasn't good. But I would reframe and say that's a very, very common moment of growth. It is a good moment to, if your consumers are really asking for no seed oils, to do a switch. Usually the impacts are not immediately visible, so shelf life testing is going to be super important. If you do a one-for-one swap, one oil to another, you're like, look, it worked. Your homework is not finished. You still are going to benefit tremendously from doing some, rigorous shelf life studies to see how does it change over time if it does.
I know it can also be a big investment because at T Squares we've changed our like packaging size in our formulation.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
luckily we were only in, I think, 100 stores at the time. And so it's manageable. But if you're in 2,000, 3,000 stores, you're coming out with a new formulation, it usually necessitates a new UPC number and
Yeah,
package design. And
right.
how do you have multiple products then at the market at the same time? Do they live on
Yeah.
the same shelf? Can they be replaced from the same spot from a retailer? Usually not if the UPC is different. And so I think navigating that challenge can get more difficult as the company grows. You have to plan it in with production of both packaging, the product, retailers, shelf resets, your e-commerce sales. So there are a lot of things that go into it. And so you do have to think strategically upon if and when to make those decisions because you don't want to change something now and then
Right.
in a year, you realize consumer sentiment changing in a different direction, and you find
Yes.
yourself needing to reformulate or change again just to chase it. And I think that's maybe the heart of it too. Like, how do you tell when these things are a 1 to 2 year fad or trend, and when is it going to be lasting?
You can't always tell. That's part of it. So I think it all sort of comes back to having your core brand values that come from your reason for being, right? I think that that's very protective to have a clear vision on why are you making what you're making, what is the North Star as you are continuing through your business growth, and are the changes that you're making aligned with your North Star or are they chasing? And as long as you are continuing to keep your brand North Star, I think that you're pretty well protected against changing your formulation every couple of years because the sort of, the Instagram tide changes.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because I just remember like in the heart of the keto movement,
Yeah,
right? Like every product had keto listed on the packaging. People were reformulating all these big changes, and it necessitated using a lot of sugar alcohols and a lot of ingredients. And then there was a rejection of a lot of those ingredients, and then
right.
companies then had to either launch and change or have make multiple changes. So I think there's a lot of that resonating with founders as well. And so, yeah, I definitely love what you said about understanding your North Star, what you care about, and making sure that there's enough consumer and consumer demand behind that vision of the world that you want to be. Because I think that's also challenging when
Yes.
founders are starting out, if they're very niche and have a special point of view, does that limit them from other consumers, or is it a way to build, as someone once taught me, kind of concentric circles where you
Yeah,
start small, but the circle can get bigger and include more people as they learn about your products.
for sure. Yeah. And I think, integrity and authenticity never go out of style. And so, as long as you are operating from that lens and uh, other folks are in the same sort of niche corner as you, enough that you can continue to keep growing, I think that that is a very good foundation for ongoing growth without just the whiplash of consumer sentiment.
I love that. Robin, thanks so much for being on and talking about this today. I think one thing if founders are looking to reformulate and understand kind of where consumer trends are going, I always recommend working with JPG Resources. I know you and the team, Jeff, are doing really great work in terms of helping founders navigate the complexities and changes with a viewpoint on, staying with and having integral, in products that can represent your value. So thanks for all the work that you and the rest of the team do.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.